7. The Wheel of Ra. There was no easy choice as to which ride to take next. The ones that seemed to lure me were the ones most likely to trap me. On the other hand, the rides that gave me the worst feeling must have made me feel that way for a reason. I finally settled on the Wheel of Ra as my next ride, mainly because I had no feeling about it either way. It was what you would call a vomit ride. You know the kind. You get inside what's basically a big drum that spins you around and around, gluing you up against the wall with centrifugal force and making you so nauseous that you end up puking things you probably ate in previous lives. The wheel itself had an Egyptian theme. There were pictures of guys with their shoulders turned sideways, and hieroglyphics adorned in gold. As I approached the turnstile, my feet felt heavy. It was hard to move forward, as if a wind were pushing against me, but the air was dead still. I figured it was just the park trying to slow me down and prevent me from finishing my sixth ride. My arm on the turnstile felt like lead. I could barely lift it. I fought gravity, got my hand high enough to slide it across the scanner, and forced my way through the resisting stile. Something's wrong, I told myself, and then told myself to shut up. Of course something was wrong. Everything was wrong in this place. "Have you ever been on this ride before?" asked a clueless kid in front of me as we stepped up to the wheel. The kid looked a little nervous. His eyes were so big, he looked like something from one of those Japanese cartoons. "On it before? This must be your first ride." The kid shrugged. "Well, the lines were too long everywhere else. I couldn't pick which one to go on first, so I've just been walking around most of the night." I wanted to offer the kid some advice, but I couldn't think of anything to tell him. "I hope it's not too fast," he said, as he took his place in the wheel beside me. I looked across the circle at the other riders. They were all excited and mesmerized in anticipation of their next thrill. It was only as the wheel began to grind into motion that it occurred to me why this ride felt so terribly wrong. This was not my ride. The symbol hadn't been glowing when I swiped it over the scanner. The turnstile didn't want to admit me because this wasn't a ride meant for me. Was that to my advantage? Or would it only make the ride harder? I'd find out soon enough. Because the ride had begun, and I was committed to seeing it through. The lights around me now spun and strobed, making the eyes on the Egyptian pictographs appear to move. I was pressed against the wall, feeling dizzier by the second. This is not my ride. Faster and faster. I saw glimpses of the outside world through the slits in the drum, like one of those old-fashioned spinning movie drums. A zoetrope, it's called. Through those slits, I saw the world change. The pre-dawn black sky of the amusement park turned a rich indigo blue. The ride never felt like it actually slowed, but the world stopped spinning around it. We were no longer pressed against the padded walls of the wheel. In fact, there was no padding behind us at all. We were standing against the stone pillars of a circular temple, and the pictographs that had been decorating the walls had become Egyptian warriors, each with more muscles than those Russian guys that lift 18-wheelers on the Extreme Sports Channel. They began to round us up with whips and brute force. "Don't let them catch you," I shouted. "Well, duh," said a girl dressed in filthy rags. Actually, we were all dressed in filthy rags, our costumes for the ride. The other riders raced around the temple in confusion, trying to get away, but the guards must have been through this 1,000 times. They caught each rider easily, rounding them all up, shackling them at the ankles, and forcing them to the ground. I saw an unguarded opening between two pillars. It was my chance to get away. But as I began to run, I saw the clueless kid, the one with the buggy cartoon eyes, with a whip wrapped around his neck, held by a monster of a guard with the neck of a linebacker, who looked mighty fierce, even in a skirt. The kid's eyes bulged even more than they had before. I cursed my stupid conscience. Then I raced over to the kid, grabbed the whip, and unwrapped it from his neck. The guard looked at me like I was a quarterback he was about to sack. He was too big to fight, but guys that big can also be clumsy. Still holding the end of his whip, I ran straight toward him. Then, at the last second, I slid beneath his legs, coming out the other side. He didn't let go of the whip, which is what I was counting on. My momentum pulled the whip and his arm between his own legs, leaving him off balance. I rammed into him, toppling him. Then I wrapped his own whip around his muscle-bound neck and pulled tight until his eyes were the ones bulging. Touchdown. And then I heard another kid behind me. "Kill the creep," he said. "Yeah," said another. I could have done it. The guard was gasping for breath, and as strong as he was, he couldn't pry me loose. But the malice in those kids' voices got to me. Rather than finishing him off, I let him go. By now, I'd attracted the attention of the other guards, but the rest of the kids were getting some nerve of their own and fought back. Some of them had already been captured, but more managed to get away, running from the hilltop temple in all directions. I ran until I knew I'd outrun my pursuers. Then I stopped to take in my surroundings. It had to be the most spectacular of Cassandra's worlds. It was Egypt, but not the real Egypt. It was an exaggerated, absurd version of everything you might imagine Egypt to have been in its glory, but many times larger than life. To the north, the pyramids of Giza towered into the sky. The Great Pyramid's solid gold tip shone like an illuminatus. You know, that pyramid eye on the back of a dollar bill. It shone against a twilight sky painted in hues of deep indigo blue. The entire sky looked like a bruise across heaven. In the valley before me, along the bank of the Nile, stood a great city of stone and gold. Hundreds of workers hauled massive stones and obelisks. They were also dressed in tattered rags, but the shirts on their backs were bloodied and torn by the whips of their brutal taskmasters. Cassandra had said that these worlds were built on the souls of those trapped here. Watching this human machine of construction, I believed it. I hid behind stones and scaffolds, darting in and out of shadows, trying to keep out of the taskmaster's lines of sight. This was not my ride. There was no place for me here, no secret terror to tackle. All I had to do was pass through the city undetected and find the seventh ride. At the edge of the city, a team of workers pulled on ropes, dragging a statue that lay on its back. It was the statue of a pharaoh, his stone image decorated with diamonds and silver. Even lying on his back, the statue was 2 stories high, and the workers dragging it couldn't move it more than a few inches at a time. When the coast was clear, I darted into the gilded city, where more workers labored joylessly, setting tiny jewels into the lines of pictographs. It was a world of opulence, that was clear. But for whose benefit? "Idols here," a voice shouted, and I turned to see, of all things, a street vendor. He held a tray before him like a peanut vendor at a baseball game. "Get your idols here. Ra, Horus, graven image of Tutankhamun, king of the Nile. Better likeness here than on the Great Sphinx." "The face on the Great Sphinx isn't King Tut's," I told him, sounding way too much like a know-it-all. "It is here," he said. He glanced at my filthy clothing. "Escape from the mud pits, huh?" he said. "Good for you. Better change out of those clothes or you'll be caught for sure. I wouldn't want to be in your sandals then." "Can you tell me where the next ride is?" He laughed at me. "I just sell idols, kid." "But you didn't always sell idols. You were once a kid like me, weren't you? How many years have you been here, play acting for Cassandra?" He looked at me sternly, like we were on stage and I'd forgotten my part. "Do you want an idol or not?" "If you help me, I'll be the first one to make it through," I told him. "I'm on my 6th ride." "Yeah, right. And I'm Cleopatra." Then he turned and continued on, shouting, "Idols here!" I was about to let him go, but my mind hooked on something I'd seen on his tray. No, it can't be what it looked like, I told myself. It's just coincidence, right? Just my mind playing tricks on me. It has to be. I hurried after him, and he sighed, figuring I was going to keep on pressing him for information. "I want to see your idols." "Forget it. You can't afford anything I have anyway." "So what? I still want to see them." Wanting more than ever to be rid of me, he held up a jade cobra. "Tell you what. You can have this one for free. It's Wadjet, the protector of kings. Guaranteed to bring you luck, although not always good." I wasn't interested in the cobra. Instead, I picked up a gold statue of a pharaoh. "That's my best seller," said the vendor. "King Tut. He brings good fortune to crops and livestock. No plagues or your money back." My hand shook as I held the little statue. The graven image was well carved. Its likeness was perfect. I turned around, looking back toward the team of slaves in the distance. They were still pulling the giant statue on its back. Only the statue's profile was visible, but the likeness was unmistakable. As I looked around, I found the image of the king everywhere, in the jeweled artwork of the buildings and on the sides of the towering obelisks. The vendor grabbed the little statue back. "Out of your price range, kid. No freebies on Tut." Something he'd said came back to me. I turned to the north, where, between the jagged points of pyramids, I found the Great Sphinx. Its body was the crouching form of a lion, but its face was that of a pharaoh whose stony face was adorned with silver earrings and nose rings, and a ring jammed diagonally through his eyebrow. Just like the actual person. Just like Quinn. "The boy king," said the vendor. "Gotta love him. His reign is always short, but believe me, it's intense." "That's my brother." The vendor was only slightly moved. "Lucky him." My head was spinning, and I stumbled back against a wall to steady myself. My brother was King Tut. It gave whole new meaning to the term vomit ride. "This slave insists on having an audience with you." A brawny guard hurled me into a great room 50 yards long. A carpet of rose petals filled the chamber with a sweet, rich aroma as I treaded toward a raised platform. Quinn was there, all right. He reclined on a silk settee while musicians played strange, stringed instruments alongside him, and richly dressed courtiers talked to one another, filling their plates with food piled high on a long table. Quinn didn't come close to the table. Instead, beautiful women encircled him, feeding him from silver platters. He was dressed like a pharaoh, from the top of his gold and turquoise headdress to the soles of his sandals. I, on the other hand, still wore rags that It smelled so badly of mildew and sweat that not even the rising aroma of roses could mask the stench. Quinn saw me and sat up. "Hey, bro, look who got the best seat on the ride!" Our last encounter had been a hard awakening for me, having to face Quinn's desperation and emptiness. I wasn't sure this was any better. Quinn the god, emperor of all he surveyed. A guard grabbed me by the neck, forcing me to my knees. The rose petals did little to cushion my kneecaps from the stone ground below. "Humble yourself before Pharaoh." "No, it's okay," said Quinn. "Allow the slave to approach." Reluctantly, the guard removed his hand from my neck and let me rise. I stepped up to the raised dais, where Quinn luxuriated like a pig in a very expensive poke. He grinned and held up the pharaoh's crook, the hooked scepter of the kings. "Hey, check out the back scratcher. You won't find that at the Sharper Image." He was so full of this fantasy, so drunk on it, I didn't know if there was any way to reach him. It was like he was dangling from the hanging roller coaster rails again, never seeing the train coming around the bend until it was too late. "I can't save you, Quinn. I can't save you from yourself." That's what I wanted to say, but no words came out. He was all smiles. "Speechless, huh? I'm not surprised." "Time's running out," I finally said. "It's almost dawn." He looked to a huge window, framing the timeless and unchanging indigo sky. "It doesn't look like dawn to me." "No, I mean in the real world, the place that matters." Quinn looked around furtively, then leaned in close so that no one else could hear. "Don't ruin this for me," he said. And I saw, behind all the glitz and dazzle Quinn had surrounded himself with, that hollow desperation that was always there. "You have your life," he whispered. "Your grades, your scholarship. Let me have this." How could I argue against that craving in him, that bottomless need for something more? "Quinn, whatever you think is happening here, you're wrong. No matter how empty you feel inside, this place won't fill you. It's like cotton candy, and in the end, it'll destroy you." Quinn looked around at his court, where dozens of subjects filled the great hall, ready to bow to his every whim. "If I have to spend my life trapped on a ride, then I'm fine with this one." He leaned back on his settee and motioned to one of the slave girls, who fed him more candied dates. "The mighty Tutankhamun moves for no man," he said, loud enough for his subjects to hear. "The mighty Tutankhamun was killed by his advisor." "That's never been proven," said a familiar voice. I turned to see Cassandra step out from behind a pillar. "Meet my advisor," said Quinn. She looked beautiful, with her painted eyes and gilded robe, exotic and invincible. But I had seen the fear in her. No amount of glamour could hide it now. "If you're going to crash our party, at least have something to eat." She waved her hand at the elaborate spread of sumptuous dishes and the courtiers who had filled their plates with food, although none of them were actually eating. They were all watching us. "Why don't you tell him how the ride ends?" I said. I had a pretty good idea how it did. "Gloriously," she winked at me. "An interment in the Valley of the Kings." Quinn beamed. "See? And you were worried." "That's a funeral," I informed him. At that moment, one of the courtiers near the throne collapsed to the ground like a rag doll. No one seemed to care. "Who was that?" I asked. Now Quinn looked a bit concerned. The food taster." I looked around at the courtiers in attendance, who were still not eating from their plates. Quinn brought his hand to his stomach. "I don't feel so good." He stumbled back onto his settee. A girl tried to feed him another date, but he pushed her hand away. "Why do I feel so dizzy?" "The nature of the ride," answered Cassandra. I tried not to sound as desperate as I felt. "I'll make you a deal. Let my brother go, and I'll stop right here on the 6th ride." A chorus of murmurs broke out behind me. "Sixth ride, 6th ride, 6th ride, 6th ride." The crowd's whispers dropped into silence, and courtiers were even more attentive than they had been before. They were clearly impressed by how far I'd gotten, and that fact was not lost on Cassandra. Self-sacrifice. I like it. But why should I bargain now, when I already have you both?" Quinn fell to his knees, gripping his stomach. "Blake, help me!" I lunged toward him, but the guards held me back. Even if I broke free, what could I do? "You can't save him," Cassandra said. "You couldn't save anyone 10 years ago, and you can't save your brother now." 10 years ago? My anger flared. "You caused that accident, not me." "But you were the one who let them die." "That's not true." It was as if I were shrinking down to be that child again, smashing against her accusations, like I smashed against the unyielding emergency exit door. The angrier I got, the calmer she became. They died because you didn't try hard enough to open that door. I was 7 years old. Quinn fell over groaning and curled up like a baby. Cassandra was right. I couldn't save Quinn. Maybe I never could. But was it too late for him to save himself? There's a way out of every ride, Quinn, I shouted to him, hoping he was still conscious enough to hear me. There's a way out of every ride. But as the guards dragged me out, Cassandra shook her head and said, Not for the king. The Egyptians did not have dungeons, at least not in the medieval sense, but they did have plenty of tombs. The place they dumped me was every bit as nasty as one of those medieval dungeons where people got tossed in the Dark Ages and were left there to rot. An oubliette, that's the word. It sounds French, but 5 will get you 10. It was invented by ancient Egyptians. The guards said nothing as they threw me in. They merely ripped my watch from my wrist, figuring I'd have no further use for it. It was the one thing that had stayed with me from ride to ride, an ever-present reminder of the passing night. Then they heaved a heavy stone over the opening, which sealed me in with an echoing boom. It didn't seem like Cassandra to leave me here to die, but perhaps I had her so scared she just wanted to be rid of me. I heard something move in the cell just a few feet away from me, and I froze. Instantly, my mind ran through all the things it could possibly be. Rats, cobras, scorpions. There was a narrow slit in the roof, not wide enough to climb through, but wide enough to bring in a small shaft of light from high above. My eyes adjusted to the light, and I strained to see what nature of creature I'd be entombed with. It wasn't a creature, but a person, another prisoner. He was chained to the tomb wall and looked weak, as if he had been in this place for a very long time. Yet he didn't seem surprised to see me. Hello, Blake, he said. Damn, you've grown. It was like being smashed in the head with a pole again. Dad? So, here we are, he said. At least you didn't get chained to the wall. I closed my eyes. This was not possible. It was just another trick of the ride. It had to be. You're not really here, I said through gritted teeth. You're a fake. My real father's somewhere in Oregon with his new family. Idaho. Shut up. I opened my eyes again, trying to will the vision away. It didn't work. If there was anyone in this world I didn't want to see, let alone ride with, it would be him. This man whom I locked out of my mind so long ago. This man whom I barely remembered. Are you real? How the hell should I know? A whole host of unwanted, unhelpful emotions began to cloud my focus and reasoning. I didn't need this. I had enough to face without facing him. Too bad. You've got me, whether you want me or not, he said. I didn't say anything. Didn't you? And that told me all I needed to know. He had read my thoughts, which meant he wasn't real. It was just the park, reading my mind again, throwing out yet another stumbling block to slow me down and keep me distracted until my time ran out. That explained why his face was hidden in shadow. It was because I couldn't really remember his face, and the ride couldn't spit back what my mind couldn't feed it. I knew all this in my head, and yet I also knew it didn't matter that he wasn't real because there's a part of you that your mind can't reach. It's the part of you that jumps when the monster pops out of the darkness on a movie screen. It's the part that's endlessly amazed by magicians, even though you know their tricks are just sleight of hand. It believes what it sees, and right now, it saw my father. If you think I'm going to fight with you or forgive you for abandoning us, forget it. You're not sucking me into some big emotional thing. Who says I want to? I paced the tomb, stumbling over chunks of stone that littered the ground, angry at myself for feeling angry at all. Someday, there'd be a time and place to face my father in the real world, but not here, not now. I forced myself to stop pacing. I had to bring clarity to my thoughts. I'm getting out of here. This is a tomb, my phantom father said. It can only be opened from the outside. I concentrated on the massive ceiling stone. My strength comes from my will. I hurled myself at the stone and pushed on it with every ounce of determination I had. I pushed and pressed and rammed against it, bruising my shoulders and scraping my hands. The stone didn't budge. You never did have much willpower. Don't talk to me! I fell to the ground, crouching in the corner that was farthest away from him. Time ticked by in silence. All I could hear was my own breathing, then eventually my own heartbeat, and the occasional rattle of chains across the tomb as my fellow prisoner shifted positions. Was this eternity for me then? A cold, claustrophobic hell with a living reminder of why my life got so screwed up? A few minutes more, then a sound grated against the silence. The grinding of stone on stone, followed by a sliver of light cutting across the chamber. The heavy stone door opened, and a burly, menacing figure entered with a torch. It only took a moment for me to recognize him. It was the linebacker guard from the Hilltop Temple, the one whose life I'd spared. The mark from the whip was still there, around his oversized neck. I stood up as he approached. "Is it true, what they say?" he asked. "You've really made it through 6 rides?" "This is my 6th, I told him. He smiled like a little kid. "I've never met anyone who's made it that far. There are rumors about you spreading through all the rides." The guard looked up at the small slit in the roof and the distant sliver of blue sky beyond. "Is it still out there?" "What do you mean?" "The real world. I keep trying to remember what it was like. Sometimes I can't." I took a step closer to him. He was real. A rider who got caught in the park at dawn, like the bartender in that tavern. "How long have you been here?" "I've lost track. There are no days here. The sun never moves in the sky. The clouds never change." A faint rattle from the corner reminded me that my father was still there. I turned, and although I looked directly at him, the glare from the torch had left a dark spot on my retina. I couldn't see his face, and I knew that no matter how hard I tried to see it, I never would. The park couldn't show me what it didn't know. Even so, this phantom father could help me. "You're not real. You're just another false face of this park, but that means you know things about this place that I don't. So you're going to tell me what I want to know." He shifted his arms, rattling his chains. "Why would I do that?" My hands balled into fists, but I crossed my arms to keep myself from using them. "Because somehow you're also my father, and you owe me and Quinn more than you could possibly imagine." He said nothing to that. "So you're going to tell me what I want to know," I repeated. The guard looked from me to him, to me again. "What do you want to know?" my father whispered. "I want to know about Cassandra. Who is she? What is she?" He sighed and looked down. "She's the tidal wave that wiped out the Minoans. She's the eruption that leveled Pompeii. Whenever something horrible happens in the world, something senseless, whenever there are no survivors, Cassandra is there." The magnitude of what he was telling me was as heavy a weight as a pyramid cornerstone, but it was lightened by what I now came to realize. "What if there was one survivor?" I asked. He said nothing more. The guard stepped between us. "What are you saying?" My brain was whirling, but I did my best to explain. "There was an accident a long time ago, and she was there. A school bus spun out of control on an icy road and fell into a deep ravine. I was the only one who survived." I could feel the guard's excitement build as he considered it. "So then, you were supposed to die?" But I didn't. He looked at my father, who turned his shadowy face toward the stone. "If no one survives Cassandra, and you did," said the guard, "then you could be the only one who's ever beaten her." I shook my head. "I didn't beat her. I just survived." "So survive again. How did you survive the first time?" "I don't remember." "Try. You must remember something." I turned away in frustration. I've been through it 1,000 times. The bus was spinning out of control. We crashed through the guardrail, and I couldn't open the back door. "And then?" "And then nothing." I paced away, but there was nowhere to go in the small chamber. There was nothing else. One moment, I was there at the back of the bus, and the next thing I remember, I was home, and no one was talking about it, and no one has since. I felt like pounding my head against the wall to shake loose the memory. There was a gap in there. I always knew it was there, but since no one ever discussed the crash, it was easy to ignore. The crash had knocked me unconscious. The concussion erased my memory of the trauma, and that was that. Why did it matter? Why should anyone care? "If you're going to be the one to make it out," said the guard, "you're going to have to remember what you did." He looked at me for a moment more, then motioned to the open door. "Come on. I can lead you to the 7th ride." But getting out wasn't enough. "What about my brother?" "Who?" "The pharaoh, King Tut." The guard lowered his eyes. "You can't save him." He was right about that. Only Quinn could save Quinn. I knew that. But if he was still alive, perhaps I could give him the means to save himself. Where would he be now? Where would they take him? "It doesn't matter," he said flatly. "King Tut dies. King Tut always dies. You can't change the ride." Well, we'd see about that. I started to follow the guard out, but in the corner of the room, the phantom image of my father began to speak. "Lake?" His face was still fuzzy and unclear, but I had to admit, his voice was the voice I remembered. I told you what you wanted to know. Now you have to do something for me. What? Let me out of here, he said. Please. I've been in this place for a long, long time. In the torchlight, I could see how truly helpless he was in those shackles. It was a fair request. Whatever he might deserve, I didn't think he deserved this tomb. I picked up a stone lying on the ground and smashed the chains until the links broke. Once he was free, he left. Simple as that. Just like he did all those years ago. No apologies, no thank yous, no goodbyes. Still, it didn't change the choice I made to let him go.